Stewart Hicks teaches studio and theory courses at University of Illinois at Chicago and has a practice called Design with Company, which does competitions and designs exhibitions, installations, and pavilions. He is also the creator of Architecture with Stewart, a YouTube channel that has accumulated over 50,000 subscribers in less than 10 months. All of that on the back of only 2 million video views, which might sound like a lot, but in today's landscape, it is a testament to the quality of video that Stewart is producing. The videos break down seemingly complicated architectural concepts in easily understandable and entertaining ways. Stewart's calm and clear delivery reminds me of my favorite teachers in school, and he uses that motivation and expertise to help others appreciate the spaces we inhabit. So, let's all open our textbooks to page 53 and put our hands together and welcome to the podcast, Stewart Hicks.
Hey, welcome to the show, Stewart.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much.
So if there was ever a time that I wanted to implore listeners to this show to listen or to watch the videos of a guest, it would be you. I think, and I was telling this to Chad the other day, we were talking about your videos, and I'm like, man, I feel like I'm getting in on the ground floor of something big here. And I honestly believe that. And if anybody listening to this is thinking, why would I want to listen to architecture? Because it's about much more than that. It's the philosophy of design, and they're funny, and your presentations are just fantastic. And everybody, when you're done listening to this show, go watch Stewart Hicks videos. They're fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for that glowing praise. Yeah, maybe in between binge listening to this. I didn't know. Was the numbers that you said not normal? The 2 million views.
So especially in like kind of today's environment where subscriptions are moving kind of out of the forefront, and it's more about just kind of tracking your viewer history, and then recommended kind of like the front page of YouTube tends to be the way that people discover and continue kind of consuming content. And subscriptions, we've had people on who get 20 million views in a month and through that amount of views, don't attract that type of subscriber base. So under 2 million views for 50,000 subscribers is again, a testament to the quality content that you're producing. I saw that the channel was created, or excuse me, your YouTube account was created way back in 2007. I'm assuming you were just locking your name down on YouTube. It was December 8th, 2020 that your first video came out. Talk about what led to your first video coming out on YouTube.
Wow, yeah. So that was a real journey. So I've been, in teaching architecture for quite a while, and I a couple years ago wanted to start making some YouTube videos that would bring the way that we talk about the design of architecture to the public. There's all kinds of content on YouTube of architecture but it's like lectures by, firms, or it's a panel discussion or something like that. It's just really inaccessible, I think, and not presented in a way that somebody would find or, seek in any way unless they were an insider. And I really wanted to make something that would appeal to people that aren't already insiders, that could make people feel like they are entering into a kind of conversation, but it's not one that's it's not exclusive. I don't think that the architectural design needs to be spoken about in the exclusive way that it tends to be. A couple of years ago, I wanted to start, and I couldn't. I could not get that first video out. I think a few months. I probably re-recorded the same video at least a dozen times over the course of probably 12 weeks, and I have every single version to testament. And then the pandemic happened, and we started teaching online, and I had a large lecture course of 100 some people, and I had to make lectures for them. I had to record them. So I had to get over that hump of I hate seeing my face on the screen. I hate recording this. It's very awkward. But I had to do it, and that was the kind of push It's like, okay, I've been wanting to make videos. We make videos in our design practice for all sorts of projects, and I really got into that. And so I felt like taking the kind of teaching world and putting it into video and onto YouTube, I thought could have some merit and be interesting to people. And so December 8th was the conclusion of my first semester of online teaching, where the students at the end of the semester said, you need to start a YouTube channel. And I said, I've been wanting to for months, but I couldn't do it. And your encouragement is exactly what I needed to get over that hump. And so I really appreciate those students for engaging me in that.
That is so fantastic. I think like Chad was mentioning, you got to be like the best professor there. I would love to sit in on your lectures. What did your students think? Do you still hear from your students about your YouTube videos now?
Yeah, I think, so I was doing these things where I was almost doing like Dr. Disrespect, sort of over the top, like, are you ready to start? Me popping out of buildings and stuff. Like I got a green screen and I was doing all these like shenanigans because like all these people are sitting at home, I think I thought the expectation was that, the students would expect me to just not make class terrible, but I wanted to do it. Like, I want you to want to come to this. Like I wanted it to be entertaining. And so I just, I really, it was probably a little over the top. Like it was probably hard for them to take me seriously, but, as some of my videos, I'm willing to, make a fool of myself every once in a while for a laugh. If it means engaging people on serious architectural issues.
Well, I think I found your channel because my son, who's 24, and he was a literature major, and he found your videos, and he was like, man, you got to see this guy. And so I started watching him. So yeah, it hits everybody. You're in that sweet spot there of being able to appeal to so many people on a subject that nobody else seems to be covering in an interesting manner. I think right on your website, your Design with Company website, it says you explores, and it's kind of reminds me of your YouTube channel. So you say you explore the territory between the architectural and the literary, real and unreal, mundane and fantastic. I think that's a pretty good description.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I've always been fascinated with storytelling in architecture. And how every building seems to have a story, and the way that, like Bruno Mars, the 99% Invisible podcast, the way he talks about how, there was a building on the Chicago River boat tour that he had never really paid attention to before, but then all of a sudden he was told the story of why it looks the way it is. And it has these big, massive corners, and the story was that the big massive corners was because the person who built it didn't want anybody to have a corner office. They wanted to make it so that nobody could have that. And so it became this kind of egalitarian building that way. And that even though he didn't like the building anymore necessarily, it resonated with him to know the story of why it is the way it is. And I think that, I take that lesson, and I think that could be true for a lot of people, that kind of pairing buildings with stories is a really powerful tool for getting people to kind of consider their environment a little bit more.
Your first video was called Architecture is an Art and Science. First of all, the hand that came in and fixed up your makeup. We got to talk about that.
That is my wife and partner who doesn't want to be on the videos, but she's my partner in practice. So like we kind of do everything together, but she didn't want to be in front of the camera. So her hand dabbling was the first bit of it, but she's come to do tons of things and work on other things as well. But yeah, that we were trying to make light of the fact that, like, because I was so uncomfortable just being on camera, it was like, okay, I'm just gonna like make it clear that I'm on this. I think this is a joke. What was the process that you went through kind of leading up to, I understand you went through and you kind of shot that video 12 times and whatever. Did you turn to YouTube? Did you find someone to try to inspire you? Or did you try to find someone who's like, okay, this person's kind of doing what I want to do, so let me try that? How did you get inspired to figure out what your look or aesthetic was going to be? That's a great question. So that's a great question. I think I look to science videos like Veritasium and those.
We just mentioned that before you came on. We were talking about Veritasium.
Yeah.
How he approaches science the way you approach architecture.
Yeah, I try hard to do that. I think I also watch a lot of car videos. So like Donut Media, I don't know if you guys know them, but like they make really fantastic videos about cars and stuff. I've tried stuff that they're a little bit more like have a bro-y energy about them. So like maybe some of my more like really rambunctious videos are kind of inspired by them. But yeah, I think I've often tried to think about presenting architecture to the public in the way that science is presented to the public. So I've thought about like Cosmos and, older, versions of that, and how, like Cosmos is amazing that way, where it's like, you look at a crab and you see a face and he tells the story of why it has a face in it, because people kept, selecting for that, and like the way that we control the world through that. And I wanted to learn from, because I think science does a good job of presenting themselves to the public, and architecture maybe not so much. Architecture tends to get presented through like only Frank Lloyd Wright and only a tour of falling water, and that's the only message. And I think those science shows like Veritasium or something like why does the Cosmos hate your computer, or whatever that latest one
right,
is.
Yeah.
And and he starts talking about things that you didn't know it was going to be headed toward. And I think that that's a really great way of introducing people to subjects.
Yeah, and if I could just give a quick example, your most recent video at the time we're recording this is about bricks. And, as I say that, I can understand why people listening to this would think, no, I'm not going to watch a video about bricks. But it's not about bricks. It's about how the bricks speak to you in a way. I mean, you could probably explain that a little bit better than I have. And plus, that was a very funny video. The guy you were with was hilarious. Oh God, he's so great. Will Quam. He has a project called Brick of Chicago, where he takes people on tours of different neighborhoods in Chicago. And I reached out to him. I said, I have an idea for a video, and it's a play on this trope, this architect Lucan used to say to his students that if you ask a brick what it wants to be, it wants to be an arch. And that's it's telling, it's an interesting way to kind of talk about how a material has a kind of affinity to do certain things and not others. But at the same time, it's ridiculous. And when Khan would do it, he doesn't acknowledge the ridiculousnly. Like, it's all like, oh, that's what was so funny. He was like, it's a brick. It doesn't have a soul. It doesn't think. So the whole premise of the video is like, we want to kind of highlight that ridiculous part of it, and you're going to be the straight person on this, and I'm going to kind of go in as an architect, assuming that bricks can talk because this guy Louis Kahn said they could, and I need you to tell me more. And he played it to perfection, and he could hit a tone. Like, I'm pretty high energy, I'm a little frenetic, and he could hit that dry, like, he was a
slow tone that I just can't do. And that was the first time I've really worked with someone else. I think every video I'm trying to like build in other technical skills and that one was like, okay, I want to interview someone, or at least have someone else and kind of dialogue with that person. And I ended up cutting myself almost completely out, because it was like his energy is so good that I need to cut myself out of this video and just kind of slow everything down and just play to what he's doing. And I thought it turned out really well. I stayed up for a couple days editing it, because it was such a new editing style. Everything was new, but I thought it was really great, and I'm really excited about it.
And I learned a lot about bricks. Really did.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information in there, even though it's presented in a really funny
Did you think
way.
you would ever say that in your life, ever? Like, ever?
I love bricks.
Well, as a woodworker, you learn from wood,
Sure, the wood speaks to me, man.
Of course.
Why don't we rewind even further? And I would love to find out why architecture plays such an important part in your life. At what point when you were a kid did you look at buildings and be like, wait, this resonates with me differently than everything else I'm being exposed to?
Yeah. That's a great question. I came to architecture pretty late. I think a lot of people will say that, they were 3 years old and they were putting Lego bricks together and knew they wanted to be an architect. And, I was from, middle of Michigan. I hadn't really been exposed to architecture that much. I assumed I wanted to be a doctor and was taking pre-med classes going into to college. And then I just realized I don't like studying this stuff anymore. Like, it kind of comes relatively naturally to me, actually, like sciences. But at the same time, it doesn't excite me. And I had drawn as a kid a lot. I had taken in high school some courses that were like humanities classes that had some architectural history in them. And I really loved to learn about buildings. I just really loved to learn about how, like, we shape them and they shape us, and like, how does that work, and what are the nuances of that? And so when I made the decision, I realized I liked learning about architecture and how it's designed, and then it kind of snowballed from there. I started teaching right out of school. I kind of always wanted to teach. I have a design practice, and I really, when I design, though, I'm really thinking about it as this kind of dance between this thing that's being designed and the people that are engaging with it. And that way I feel like the video or teaching is all part of the same thing, that it's about creating something that constructs a dialogue with an audience or a group of people, and there's engagement on both sides and a give and take, both with the thing that you designed and with the audience that's consuming it and engaging with it.
That's really interesting. That's like the architecture itself is dependent upon the landscape it's in, the people who are going to be habitating it, which is really no different than making the YouTube video, which is dependent upon the audience that's going to be watching it and being on this platform. And that's a fantastic way of looking at it.
Yeah. So I was doing a lot of research into the idea of character in architecture, and the idea that maybe buildings put us into characters. So there's this great scene in this movie With Honors. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a really old Brandon Fraser movie, but either way, they go into this this library at Harvard, and the homeless person and the student. And all of a sudden, when they go in the library, this homeless person starts to feel self-conscious about himself because he's not clean, and like and he's compelled to be quiet. So in that scene, in that movie, there's this interplay between the architecture, the institution, and the way that people feel and engage in the space that I think is quite powerful. And I think that that's true for any building, really. Like, any building kind of puts us in a character, and a building itself has a character. And I think that that's a fundamental way that architecture and an audience, I think, construct one another.
I think in one of your videos you talked about a word I'd never heard before, liminal spaces, which is this kind of, I guess, what do you can consider this the zone between a living space and a usable space, like a front porch is an example of a liminal space, right?
Yeah.
And so it has a use, but not a specific use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's recently been this kind of fascination with liminal spaces in photography, like on Reddit and other image sharing platforms, where they'll post an image of this empty space that makes people feel kind of creepy.
They're haunting. They're haunting.
They're a little bit haunting, right? Because they're not supposed to be empty. And
I love them, actually. They kind of freak me out in a way looking at them.
Yeah. And so the word liminal too does have kind of like psychoanalytical roots and things like that. And so, when an early video, I was looking at some of that stuff, and they would talk about the kind of psychological idea of liminality, and then look at the photograph. But I thought architects could have something to say about this idea that seems really popular. And so I was trying to relate architectural concepts and words that mean something similar to liminal space. So liminal space is already kind of in the ethos, or zeitgeist or in the public imagination, but here's some architects that are thinking about similar things. So like the architect Rem Koolhaas uses the word junk space, and he means something pretty similar. Or there's Marc Auger uses the word non-place, which also means something kind of similar. And he's not an architect, but architects gravitate toward him. And so, yeah, it's just kind of like trying to construct a kind of landscape of maybe lesser known concepts and terms that are really quite similar and related, so that maybe the architectural versions don't seem so distant or uninteresting or just not relevant.
As an architect, would you want to try to reduce the, I guess, liminality of a space? I think a good example you gave was airports are liminal spaces because they're just nondescript. They're not meant to, you feel lonely even with a lot of people in them. They're not really have any design to them. Do you think that's something that, as an architect, you would want to improve that and make it more of a inviting space, or like a shopping mall, which they all kind of look alike for whatever shopping malls are left, I guess?
I think there's a time and a place for a real range of architectural solutions to things. So like that guy I was just talking about, Rem Koolhaas, when he's talking about junk space, he's actually not being that critical of it. He's actually saying, there's a lot of this stuff in the world, and as architects, we should probably take stock and understand why it exists, maybe learn to embrace it sometimes, like when it actually serves a purpose, and then not do it when we don't want to do it. So sometimes we need to learn from the things that we think offhand seem like, from the outset, seem like bad ideas, but maybe there's something in there. And so, I would think sometimes background buildings are exactly what you need. Sometimes things that just kind of go away and only serve a kind of a purpose for consumerism. Like sometimes that's what's needed. So I would say for me, I don't want to produce those kinds of spaces, but I also I don't want to dismiss them as always bad right off the bat.
And that's how I kind of heard it. And I wrote both of those words down because I was exposed to them for the first time through your video. But I remember the thought of non-place specifically, because I was like, it makes sense that you don't want... in like art, there's like white space, and it's how to use white space to not have everything fill and actually start to have space between things. So it made sense to me, and this was just my take, it's like places like hallways and entryways and escalators and whatnot, you almost are doing yourself a favor by not adding on all of these extra elements and design things, because it also helps with the universality of it. I clearly get that I just made that word up, but it makes it be like, this is an escalator. It's not this fancy designed escalator which does a fancy thing. It's an escalator. It doesn't need to be right. Unnecessarily added to. But that was just my takeaway of those terms at least.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you get an A, Chad. That was really good.
May I say, I feel so smart after I wrote so many things down that I'm not going to talk about in this interview, but I'm just going to slip into conversation with other people. So they're like, "You're so insightful. I never looked at a building that way, Chad." So thank you for that, Stewart.
Thank you.
I think the other one that you mentioned in there were Are they exurbs? Is that what you called it? Exurbs. It's not a suburb, and it's not urban. It's this weird area. And I think about in Silicon Valley, like all these office parks are basically exurbs. They have no distinctive quality to them. And if you go there on a weekend, they're just empty. They're just, it's like a ghost town there. There's no restaurants. There's just nothing open there. It's so weird. The landscaping is boring.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's, at every scale, I think that there's maybe an analogous concept. And that's maybe the biggest one. Yeah. The idea of the exurb where, and there's lots of architects that are on one end trying to embrace exurbs as being like, this is our new normal, Amazon's building giant data centers everywhere. There's going to be spaces that are, at a scale that's not quite conceived for humans, but we're still going to have to occupy it, and it's going to have to, we're going to have to deal with it. Like, how can we make the best of it? Yeah, and that's a pretty pressing question, as you mentioned, even in places like Silicon Valley where office parks are really dominating the landscape, and how much like individual character do you want an office, big office building to have? Like you talked about that idea of universality. Like I did some work with Google once. It's like they don't build many offices for themselves. They basically, renovate all their offices. And so those buildings need to represent, whether Facebook's in there or if Google's in there or whomever is in there. And, there's a kind of a role for, at least in their eyes, a role for something that's a little less specific. But at the same time, it does create some pretty unpleasant spaces for an individual to occupy. Yeah.
So that is the architecture of liminal space is your second most popular video, and I just wanted to talk about the other two, which were in your top three, because I just wanted to find out why you think they're popular. And the first one, the most popular video on your channel, is when architects copy, and I love this entire subject matter. It's why I wore this shirt. And I would love to find out what your thoughts are about why that video is your number one video.
Oh, if I only knew. I'd like to hear from you. I keep thinking, I just watched it just recently just because I wanted to, because I first said, I don't think that there's anything exceptional about that one beyond any other one. And then I watched back, it's like, oh, okay, maybe now I have some distance from it and I can see it. That's something weird about YouTube, the lag sometimes between when it gets popular and why. I'm constantly adjusting. But anyway, back to your original question about copying. I think it has a strong thumbnail. I think that, two buildings side by side that look almost identical but have some very distinguishing differences, it works well for clicking on. I think the idea of copying can be understood as threatening.
Scandalous.
And so
that's
scandalous.
What I thought. It sounds kind of drama. It sounds like you're going to drop some tea on some people.
We think there's going to be a copyright claim,
Yeah, exactly. So I think that kind of intrigue is part of it. But then, I think that the video itself touches on that sometimes there is copying in architecture that is, that is unscrupulous. But then other times it's kind of just baked into the way that architecture works. There's concepts called, the idea of typology is this concept that there are enduring underlying structures to certain building types that just get copied. And that's kind of what architects do, we already know what a cathedral should be, basically there's no reason to kind of reinvent the wheel there. We should just be comfortable copying it and then maybe just sprinkling in some details. And some people believe that, and so there's this whole range of embrace of the idea of copying to, that doesn't seem quite right. And so I think the video tries to paint a picture of a continuum of examples from film, like Tarantino. And so I show some examples from Quentin Tarantino, this scene is copied from this movie. It's identical, but Tarantino's such a great filmmaker, and he is clearly referencing this thing. It's an homage, right? But it's almost a direct copy, and this seems okay, I like this. And sometimes that happens in architecture. But then, I just saw a comment the other day, I think yesterday on that video, where they were saying those architects, that looks pretentious, and the architects were bored, because they're navel gazing, because they're only looking to the history of architecture to create new architecture. They're just kind of they're only creating buildings that only insiders can understand. And Tarantino, I think, probably gets hit for that every once in a while. But I think in architecture, there's just a real sensitivity to pretension, and that people think I'm not going to get it, or that architect probably thinks they're way too smart. And I think architects get presented that way a lot, and so they don't get away with that same thing. It's seen as snarky, or the buildings also are maybe seen as more enduring, and that they're more serious, and that there's not room for play in the same way as a film would have. So therefore, it's also not as acceptable to make these references, these kind of insider references. And I think that's an interesting way to kind of enter into, our biases about architecture and building. When you know, a Tarantino movie might cost $200 million and a building might only cost $1 million, and like the stakes are kind of similar, you know, like the financial stakes are kind of similar, but there's a lot of the idea that architecture is a service, and that you should be that the architect should be about solving the client's problems, and that's it. Sometimes can really permeate and make people really react negatively to moments like that. And I just wanted to kind of show a mirror to that and question it on all sides.
And I know architecture is subjective in a lot of ways, but is there kind of a thing that almost all architects would look at and just say, that's an example of bad architecture?
There is a game. There's a firm that Venturi Scott Brown, they were a married couple, and they used to play a game. It was, I can like something worse than you can like. And so they would play this game of like, I can figure out a way to like this thing that is unlikable. Like no one should like this, and I will. It was like a testament to how well they could argue. You know, it was like I can convince you that this is good. Like even though it's objectively horrible, I can convince you that this thing is good. And that idea of like junk space and Kohlhaas looking at junk space and saying, well, maybe it could be all right. That's kind of what the Venturis did too, and they were looking at 7-Elevens and stuff like that, and be like, you know, there's a lot of this stuff. Maybe there's some people seem to be okay with it. Maybe there's something here. So there's architects looking at a 7-Eleven and saying, that's architecture. You know, like that is what we need to be striving for. And it probably goes off the deep end, and people will say, you know, things that they started making was awful and ridiculous. There's, you know, I think the deep end of postmodernism from the 70s and 80s, there's a lot of people that might hate like the Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans by Charles Moore, for instance. Like, it's easy to hate. Like, it has just these garish, like, there's even a sculpture of the architect in there. Like, it's like that.
That's pretty self-indulgent.
It's that self-indulgent, but you know, there's going to be people that think that that's the height of architecture, and there's going to be people that think that that's the absolute like bottom of the barrel. Like, you know, we've got to have an intervention.
I think for me, it would have to be the McMansions. I mean, because they have just no. They're bringing in like 7 or 8 different styles, and like, let's just throw it all on there. And like this huge we live in this place where they put up a whole bunch of McMansions. It used to be military housing before they closed the Hamilton Air Force Base. And they just slapped all of these houses up. And I remember looking at them and opening the cabinets and stuff as a woodworker and thinking, oh my God, this is the crappiest, cheap material. But the houses are huge, and they have no backyards. They're right up next to each other, you know, and just like, oh, we'll put in an arch here, maybe some columns here. And it's just, I think that's bad design.
It's bad.
Not afraid to say it.
It is bad, and I think what's worse too is just the scale of bad. The fact that, you know, it is harming the planet. You know, like it like this idea that we feel like we can all live in 7,000 square foot, like flimsily made things that are only meant to last 10 years or 15, 20 years. Like, you know, that's bad for the planet. So I think it's objectively bad for that reason as well. And then design wise, there's a blog called McMansion Hell, which kind of breaks down.
Oh yeah.
It's great. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And it kind of breaks down the travesties of McMansion designs in like excruciating detail. It's pretty amazing.
So the third out of the top 3 videos, and we need to talk about this one for a second, is all good architecture leaks. And I read a comment. It was one of the top comments, and it's like, I seem to be watching like a bunch of architects do an inside joke. I kind of find it funny, but it's still really entertaining. I don't remember the comments exactly, but
that's the way I was.
You can unpack
I'm like, what am I watching?
The compulsion behind the video, and just it was a lot of fun.
Thank you. That was the first one that I tried to be funny. Like, I thought I could construct a premise that is at the outset funny, and taking it seriously. We can get in deep, and we can oscillate. Like, is this person, is it serious? Is it not serious? You know, and just kind of like run back and forth and keep people interested and engaged that way. So there is a saying that all good architecture leaks. Like, that is a widely known saying in all of architecture, or at least architects know it. And it's a defensive mechanism, right? Like, it's like you're asking me to create a masterpiece prototype and you don't expect this to have some leaks in there. Like, who are you? Like, it's like this defense for architecture to not have to account for, you know, construction problems that come up and things. But so the premise of the video is that, well, maybe architects are trying to make buildings that leak. And maybe that's actually a testament to good architecture, the more that it leaks. So there are buildings that do that are like ancient buildings with big holes in the roof that are, in fact, you know, magnificent constructions, like the Pantheon in Rome. I mean, and it has a big hole in the roof, and it's called an oculus, and it's supposed to be there. But it's a big leak, you know, like if you call it a leak, it's a leak. A bunch of rain comes in. And then there's just people like a Frank Lloyd Wright house who, you know, just leaks everywhere. And so in the same breath, by defining architecture through leaks, it allows us to talk about buildings that wouldn't be grouped together otherwise. And I think that's another reason why I really enjoy doing this. It's like, how can you talk about the Pantheon, Frank Lloyd Wright, Peter Zumthor, like old architecture, new architecture, all in the same breath and seamlessly, and this is where the story comes in, like seamlessly go from one to the other in a way that feels congruous and engaging. And I think that the leaks one, I was really trying to channel, I don't know if you've ever seen the show How To with John Wilson. It's a great show on HBO. It's a bunch of found footage, or not. He shoots the footage, but it has a voiceover, and he plays on like the incongruency between what he's saying and the imagery, and the way that they work together is just hilarious sometimes, profoundly deep at certain times. And that's kind of what I was trying to channel with that, where leak becomes a metaphor sometimes, or it becomes like literalized sometimes, and you can't quite tell. You can't tell if the architect is intentional about it or not, and it's all just treated as good. Like clearly sometimes I don't think it's good. Like when I talk about Peter Eisenman's house leaking, the one he designed, it leaks right onto the bed of the owners, and the owners have to sleep in two separate twin beds that are next to each other because there's a skylight that leaks right above their beds. Like, I don't think that that's good. But I'm presenting it as if it's an intentional act of architecture, and that it's a great act because it leaks. And I think that it's hopefully done in dry enough way that it's like oscillates, that it toes the line.
My takeaway was that water is in a perpetual assault on all of the buildings around it, and I realized that I never even thought about that. And out of all of the things that I thought would have probably been taken into consideration when you're building a building, the undulation of the land and this, that, and the other, where the sun's coming out, I would have never thought that you're constantly dealing with not even just like rain and then a skylight leaks, but like leaking through the bottom. And I wrote this down. Can you please explain what vapor diffusion is, and why even when something is completely waterproof, apparently it's not?
I wish I could explain that. Well, okay, so buildings need to have fresh air, brought into them just so we can stay alive. And so there's a difference between the amount of water in the air we bring in versus the air in our houses. And so it's got to condense sometimes when there's a big temperature change. So it'll condense at its dew point. And where that happens inside of a wall could mean that water condenses on the inside or the outside if it's badly detailed. And then there's just there's other kinds of diffusion where air that comes through will carry molecules. So even if water itself can't get through, when the air gets through, it'll carry some water with it. And it's the bane of architects' existence. Some architects' existence.
Do you think it's possible to come up with a new design that will become timeless? I mean, I look at, when you mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright, I live in a Frank Lloyd Wright area. The Marin Center, which is a couple miles from me, is in San Rafael, and it was built, I don't know when, in the mid-century, 20th century. And at the time, I'm sure it was very oh, this is really out there, really crazy. And today you go in that place and man, it just looks dated and old and just like, it's like watching an old Brady Bunch episode or something, And so I just wondered, was he even concerned about his stuff being timeless, or is that a thing?
Oh, that's a good question. That might be a good video to make. I think it kind of comes back to your question about universality and that kind of stuff. Like, as soon as something's appealing to all of time, are we just hitting the lowest common denominator there? Like, is it just a hunk of stone and that's it? Like, what can appeal to people over time and over all of time is really, I would hope that good design would do that, and that it wouldn't be about the lowest common denominator. But I think flexibility and adaptability comes into that. So how fixed a structure is, and here in Chicago, I live in a loft. This used to be a warehouse. And now it's a condo building, and the fact that it could go from one to the other because it has a relatively simple gridded structure, its sizes can accommodate a lot of things, means that this building is adaptable and can live on lots of different things. And then so certain parts of it that made it specifically good for being a factory become quirks and features of it being a condo, and it's not ideal as a condo, but we live with that because we appreciate the fact that this is living on, that we're, engaging with a building over time. And so I think that idea of timelessness has a lot to do with sort of loving a building enough and respecting it enough to want to have it to live over time, and to know that it might have to change over time in order to live its fullest and longest life.
And that's when it kind of starts to develop character. And you had a video talking about how people will walk into, looking for an apartment or something. They say, well, it was an okay apartment, but it had character to it,
Yeah.
And I kind of think about my own neighborhood here, which was built, this house was built in 1956. And the whole neighborhood was like, they plopped these houses down for military housing for officers at the time. And then every house got one tree in the front yard, and there's like 3 different basic designs. But over time, each house, now they look so much different from each other. We have the one house that still has the huge oak tree. Now it's massive, that's been in there. But everybody has added on, changed the colors, add different things to them. So I think that maybe it's just character just takes time.
Yeah. And I think that idea of timelessness takes time too. Yeah. Like, back to that original question, where I teach is this very, it's called UIC, and it has this brutalist campus that they designed to not need maintenance. That was the mandate. And so they built it all out of concrete, but concrete doesn't last forever. It lasts maybe 50, 60 years. So now the concrete's kind of coming apart and things aren't so flexible. It's very difficult to adapt because they were trying to build it to last forever as is. And so I think that idea of adaptability and kind of, accepting those flaws which become character is a real component of it.
Do you pay attention to your YouTube analytics? Yeah, a lot. Do you do you visit Social Blade? Are you tapped into what's working? Do you listen to a lot of comments and digest it? Where are you in your YouTube journey right now?
I hope this is the peak of obsessing over those things.
Oh no, you're just getting started.
10 months because it's been 10 months.
It feels unhealthy.
It'll get worse.
I recently did a talk with another faculty member, and he was surprised that I cared about views so much when I was talking about success. Like, I was saying, well, that one was successful and that one isn't successful. And he was like, well, only based on views. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. That is there are other metrics. But YouTube is really, it supplies a lot of data, and it encourages you to care about that stuff. And I haven't built up the wherewithal to not care to a healthy amount, but I'm looking at it a lot. For the last video, that brick video, I wanted it to do so well that I have 2 pages of titles, and literally, and I have I think 25 different thumbnails that I've switched in and out to try to figure it out. Because I was like, I think this is the funniest video ever made. Like, I think this has got to do, I was like, this has got to do well. I've got to figure out the title and thumbnail thing to match what I think is what this video deserves. And, you know, it's a process. Maybe the video isn't as good as I think, because maybe I'm too close. Maybe, you know, the titles and thumbnails, I think, is a process, but I'm trying it at all angles of, like, I'm working on the video side, working on the analytics side, working on the kind of initial stuff, and trying to work on it all the time. But yes, I'm very into the analytics.
Are there other YouTubers who are doing really good thumbnails who you're like, oh man, those guys have great thumbnails? Do you have inspiration as far as that's concerned? I try to a fault. I look at all the really big ones. Like, I watch all the videos about how to do it, first of all. And then I look at the big ones. Like, I'll look at Veritasium, or I'll look at Mr. Beast, or, you know, like the crazy ones. And I'll be like, how does that relate? I'll assess that. I'll look at ones that are more in my genre and in my scale, and like, what are they doing? And I think that's where real differences start to play out. Like, there's a really good one called Told in Stone that a lot of my viewers watch, and I'll go over to his channel, and it's basically like archaeology of Roman and Greek, and they're great. Like, they're really good. But his thumbnails are really simple. His editing style, like, he'll sit on an image for a minute, you know, like, and talk, and it's great, you know, like, and I'm engaged because the content's that engaging. And I guess I feel like I can't do that, or I'm just more into the visual stuff in a way. As an architect, maybe I'm just kind of like keyed into wanting to care about that stuff. So I will look at a range, like, what are the top things doing? What are people expecting of me at this level? You know, I'm not a 20-year-old, you know, like, you know, I don't want to do a lot of the maybe tropes of maybe some recommendations that would be true for, I don't know, like a Mr. Beast or something, but I'll look at it to figure out what I could learn from it.
I think that's really smart. Always be looking at other channels that are outside your own genre for kind of inspiration. Do you have any plans of someday just being full-time YouTube content creator?
I have a pretty cushy, like, as a professor, I'm pitching this as my similar to my research. Like, this is popularizing architecture and figuring out new mediums and modes for presenting architectural concepts. I think has value for the academy. It has value for architecture at large. I really enjoy teaching. I'm also in the administrative side. I'm an associate dean and stuff. So I enjoy the university stuff too. So I can't imagine. I have tenure. So like the like, I don't see giving that up. But
well, there's channels that do that fine. Where Destin from Smarter Every Day holds down a full-time job.
Yeah. So I could definitely see bringing the channel, like growing the channel, scaling up the channel without me giving up the day job.
Oh, it's going to be scaling.
I hope. We'll see.
That's my prediction. It's sort of another person it sort of reminds me of, and it was a guest we had on the show, was Grady Hillhouse, who does practical engineering.
Oh,
and
yeah.
he did quit his day job.
Really?
As an engineer, but his videos are just killing it. I mean, week after or month, he posts one a month, and every time he does it, it's like trending.
A month.
And that was just recent that
Just
he started
trending.
doing it full time. It was just, I think, at the beginning of this year. So
Right.
he'd been putting in quite a bit of work leading up to this point. So
Yeah, the frequency thing is kind of a tough thing. Like, I've been doing it every week, and I think, you know, at first I couldn't conceive how the visual of the video, I couldn't preconceive it, you know, like, so I treated it as a lecture. So I did everything in camera. I recorded everything in camera in OBS as if it was like a live lecture. And then, you know, I'm trying to keep up a high pace so that I can learn enough, and then maybe slowing it down once I feel like I have a better handle on what works and what doesn't, and like the tools. I think might be a good
Do you
strategy.
have a favorite part of the process, the video making process? Do you like the writing or the performing or the editing or the...
That goes in, it goes in, it's a roller coaster, you know, like whatever one I think is really working at that moment, I can get behind. Yeah, it goes in and out. I enjoy it all though. I really enjoy the aesthetic of video. Like there is such, the closeness to architecture, like time and space and all that stuff. Like it just feels really natural. And I gain pleasure out of all of it.
You did the editing yourself, yeah? And you're completely self-taught as far as the editing is concerned. How long did that take you to get to that? I've seen some of the isolations you do.
It's good editing.
I mean, I fully appreciate all of the time that goes into like hours of work just to have 17 buckets appear on the screen and then like, So.
Yeah. It's been, the channel traces the journey from not knowing a single thing to what I'm doing now. So, the first video I didn't edit really. I did it all live in camera basically with minimal edits, and then to the more extreme overt editing later on. So 10 months or 9 months or whatever.
Your growth on there is amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I would be remiss if I didn't bring up your cantilever flexing video. You're probably your most racy video, if I do say
Oh, yeah,
so.
Definitely.
I never realized until you mentioned it how phallic cantilevers are.
And then it's called a member.
And that they can start to sag and they need
they
support.
droop. Yeah. No, I was not being overtly that's the language. Like I was not.
I know. That's what's so funny about it. It's just like, oh my God, really?
However, you chose to do it in the voice of a monster truck rally announcer. Super Flags, which was brilliant, which was literally why I just lost my on that one. Yeah.
That was so funny.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the monster truck thing was, the idea was like, this idea that architects do these heroic things, or that they think is heroic. It's like, I'm going to stick this cantilever out and
they're totally flexing.
Yes, they're totally flexing. Like that's all it is. It's like it's structural gymnastics for the sake of you thinking that like some genius is holding it up with their brain, So that was the joke there.
That was kind of it was pretty brutal, I guess, probably towards some architects. I don't know, but I just have that feeling that some of them might have taken that a little bit to heart.
The architect that's featured on the thumbnail and in the intro tweeted the video and said that they were thankful for being included. So they seem to be good sports about it. I was as soon as they tweeted that though, I was like, oh no, here comes the storm. Because it's kind of poking fun at you, but I also love it. Like that's a hard balance though. Is like poking fun at people, while still being respectful and punching.
It was a good-natured roasting, I think.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite building? I know that's like a question a 5-year-old would ask you, but do you have a favorite building? And Steve, I'm
taking back that egg I gave you, Chad. Oh.
A favorite building. That's so hard. That's like asking a filmmaker their favorite film or something. It's like they pick things apart so closely. I can tell you one of my most powerful experiences at a building was at the Exeter Library by the architect Louis Kahn in Exeter at the campus. The library is simply incredible. Like it's a brick box on the outside. It's a cube. You go inside. It's a huge atrium, and the scale, it feels monumental, but it also feels very personal. And I don't feel consumed or overwhelmed by the architecture. So it's like it's grand at the same time as I don't feel small inside of it. It's like uplifting in that way. Like it makes you feel like you're part of this grand thing. And I was floored, and it was seriously like a majestical moment when I went there. And when I talk about that in a video, I present this kind of mock theory that I have, that there's certain buildings that you should always go to with a loved one, because if you have this transcendental experience with this building by yourself, you'll somehow find yourself so distant from those around you that you won't be able to
express,
like, even be on their same wavelength anymore.
Yeah.
And that was the building that I thought of that. I felt that way about it, and it was like half mocking, half serious.
Hey, let me
what's yours?
Oh, right now, you know what my favorite building is right now, and this is really dumb, is this new gym that opened. That it's one of these rock climbing gyms, because there's nothing in it except the stuff in it is so cool. It's all these colorful rocks and the boulders and everything. And so it's all about really what's inside of it. It's just a warehouse, you know.
There's one of those next door to me, and I walked by it every day during construction. It was fascinating how they construct that, you know, like the steel web inside, and then there's lots of layers of different kinds of woods that have different kinds of curvature ability that layer up on top of it. It's pretty fascinating kind of construction.
Yeah, I love it. It's my newest obsession now is rock climbing and bouldering. I got it because of Jared Poland, who was also a previous guest on this show, and he started doing it. I'm like, I'm going to give that a shot. There it is. If you had a crystal ball and could look into the future a little ways, what do you see as kind of some future trends in architecture? I know that one of them that kind of intrigues me is this idea of 3D printing buildings. Do you think that's a viable type of thing? And is that just going to be kind of gross?
Gross. Yes, I do think that 3D printing buildings will be a thing. People have for a long time tried to reconsider the way that buildings are constructed and where. So are they constructed off-site and brought to the site? How much of them is constructed off-site? You know, could we build a full bathroom? Could we build a full like living unit off-site and bringing it to site? And with 3D printing, you know, the idea that we could bring a big machine there and it could construct usually like something out of concrete, I think it's kind of a no-brainer. I'm not intimately familiar with the challenges of it that make it unfeasible or unscalable, other than, you know, there would need to be a relatively robust machine brought to site. Concrete has its, you know, it's not always the most sustainable material. Sometimes it needs to bring things in from outside a lot of times. So, you know, its future would be particular. But I think that that's definitely a thing. I think, you know, the building information modeling from the architect's perspective has really transformed a lot of things. And that's basically where you build a full 3D model of the building in the computer. It's basically a simulation of a building in the computer. And the computer itself spits out the drawings that are needed, or you can send that file to the contractor and not have to send just drawings anymore. And we're really wrestling with what that means. You know, so many architects need to see drawings, you know, and they design through drawings. So this idea of designing through a 3D model, you design in a very different way. And the processes that have built up over time built up because building a building is really complicated. You know, it takes a lot of people and it takes a lot of coordination, and there's a lot of vestiges in that process, but they work that way for a reason. So big whole scale, like sweeping changes like 3D printing buildings that undermines all of those processes are really hard to implement. I mean, it's like with electric cars or something, you know, like Tesla's challenges to get electric cars out there aren't just about making the cars, you know, like it's about the infrastructure for them. It's about, I mean, there's just so much to it, and the buildings are the exact same way. There's just so much that needs to change for big sweeping new things to come that it becomes hard to predict those things. So when you talk about a crystal ball for seeing the future, it's really hard to see because all those factors are so important in you know, dictating how a building looks and what gets built and that kind of stuff.
I have a loose follow-up question. I'm wondering, do you believe that there's going to be any large-scale changes in the way that we design buildings after this recent wave of lockdowns? And now that we're kind of getting back into the world and learning how to, like, you know, get back to what things used to be, Are we to believe that things are going to start being slightly different to take into consideration this new kind of reality that we're in?
I would think so and hope so. I don't know what those are. I am making a video. I just exported a video about when air becomes dangerous and how architects have responded to that over time and how we're responding to it now. So it's something that's kind of at the forefront of my brain. I think the first thing to change is offices. Offices are changing right now because people are working from home, and that's not necessarily about like 6-foot distancing. There's like other things that happen. People expect to be accommodated at an individual level in an office environment now that weren't expected previously. So now there's also a lot of office spaces that we don't know what to do with because they're sitting empty. So that's a big change right there. I think urbanistically, I hope that we would start to think about our cities in ways that are more inhabitable and things like that. Restaurants, I think, are really wrestling. I don't know what some of these feel like they have opportunity baked into them, and other ones feel like that just seems like an all-around worse thing, and I hope that we can all think of solutions that take advantage of the opportunities and don't make the worst thing just the worst thing.
Might there be a change in stadium design, or because that's the first one that I thought of was like when you're trying to get 20,000 people to do something, are we going to just move forward and being like, yeah, sometimes we need to shut down and we can't go to these places, but ultimately we need to build a hockey arena this way, or are there conversations that are happening now to change that thought process?
Yeah, I mean, my mind goes to precedent rather than the future, so I apologize, but I'm going to make the equivalency to the 1950s when the government, an atomic bomb could wipe out an entire city at any moment. What do? We need to spread out, so we need to encourage people to move to suburbs, and we will do that in various ways. And we got the world we're in today, because we kind of were worried about atomic bombs and things that could wipe out large concentrations of people. And again, we're at a moment where we're scared of large concentrations of people. That could be a problem. But at the same time, I hope we remember the lesson that suburbs are great for certain things, but they also cause a lot of problems, and that density has its role, and with stadiums and things like that, it's great to watch an event with lots of people. That's we feel like a collective at that moment. And right now we're so individuated, and we're all individuals in our own Zoom windows, and that's isolating and causes us to think about the world in a very different way. And I don't want to lose sight of the power of collective events and thinking as having a lot of value, even though it seems really scary right now. And I hope that we can figure out ways to make sure that we keep the good and learn the new goods that are coming. But then, I don't have an answer, but I know it's a complicated problem. And, I want hockey stadiums, and I want us to have big gatherings. But at the same time, right now, I take my mask. It's hard. It's hard.
Well, Stewart, I really want to thank you for inspiring me to look at the world differently and to look at buildings a little bit differently and to think a little bit deeper about what goes into those buildings and listen to their stories a little bit. And I want to thank you for being on our show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the questions and the insight that I've gained through this. I really, really appreciate it.
And I want to one more time implore everybody to go check out Stewart Hicks at Stewart with a W over on YouTube. Go subscribe to that channel. I'm telling you, you'll thank me for it. It's a great channel. And I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Chad and Steve Have a Podcast. We'll see you next time.